Have you ever had a car with a weird transmission? You put it in gear and there's a clunk, or you step on the gas and there's a big weight and then it goes, or there's some juddering and shaking. You've always wondered what's going on with that. Or unfortunately, you've had a vehicle where it's catastrophically let go, make some weird noise, clunk, and then you have to take it into the shop, followed by a repair bill of $7,000 or $8,000. All too often, this is happening to many unfortunate customers, and I want to break this down. Some of the worst transmissions that I've known. Let's break this down. As you can see, what I've got here is worst transmissions. I've searched this up. There's lots of information here in terms of bad transmissions, worst transmissions. There's no shortages, and there's definitely some culprits, and you'll know there'll be some consistencies here. But let's break this in. Let's go right into this one here, the worst transmission recalls of the last 5 years. The first one on this list actually happens to be a 2019 to 2020 Dodge Ram, or Ram 3500, and it affects about 84,202, and they're saying, NHTSA says there's a possibility of leaking transmission fluid, winds up on the exhaust system, and it's a potential fire risk. Not sure it's getting sorted anytime soon, but that is an issue. So if you happen to be one of those Ram owners of one of the HD trucks, certainly it's one that you might want to take a look at. Stellantis, see 23 Rams for transmission issues, 1.2 million truck recalls. There's another big one. They've been known for a lot of problems throughout the years for transmissions. The next one is a Mercedes-Benz GLE 450 and GLS 450. They're using the same drivetrains, same transmissions, and this affects 2020 to 23. That's their larger SUVs, and it says 105,071 units, as per the German manufacturer, had a recall of these transmissions, fully downshifts in certain conditions, causing the engine to stall. So clearly maybe a programming, a mechanical issue, and it was a recall, so they're saying you'd have to take it in to get it rectified. Mercedes had a pretty simple fix and just added transmission control software that impacted the cars. So here we are talking about complex transmissions and complex technology starting to take a toll now in transmissions. We have to do a programming. That's kind of silly. Chevy, Buick, GMC, Cadillac has their share of issues. So let's just take a look at this. We have a 24 GMC Sierra transmission died at 6,500 miles. We have another one, GMC fails to 8-speed auto class action lawsuit. GM to recall more than 461,000 vehicles over transmissions. GM to recall 80,000 over this other one. GM, General Motors, Chevy, they've had a lot of problems with transmissions, diesel trucks, full-size trucks, HDs, even light-duty trucks, and some of their smaller cars. They've had no shortage of issues, sadly, with transmission problems every which way from Sunday. And in this case, it's a 2018 to 2020, and it impacts 194,105 vehicles. Of that, they're saying a lot of them, the Chevy, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac. Leaking transmission fluids, causing potential risk. Of course, missing from the impacted vehicle's start stock accumulator and caps, causing fluid leak, increasing the risk of crash or fire. Not as much about drivability per se as it is just about quality control, in my own personal opinion. 20 to 22, 461,000 vehicles impacted by this. A lot of them are, you're saying there could be Silverado, Tahoe, or Suburban, GMC Sierra, and Yukon, Cadillac Escalade were all hit with this recall. And we're caught up with enormous recall, sadly, in 24. Models with diesel engines, which were found to be faulty transmission control valve, which could fail and cause the rear wheels to lock up. Wow, that sounds absolutely devastating. But the transmissions could seize up and, again, lock up everything, and you could be doing 60 miles an hour down the highway. That could be a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. We'll see more here. Subaru Ascent Legacy and Outback, 2019 to 2020 CVT reliability. We know a lot of the CVTs now have been the source and the butt of many jokes, and I talk about CVTs all the time. Ultimately, CVTs can be some of the worst transmissions. And so Toyota, we know they have an ECVT. That's not to be mistaken for a lot of these others that you'll find in the, say, the Subarus or the Nissans and the Jatcos, but they're in there for sure. And they're saying that there's 198,255 of these Subarus between 2019 and 2020. The recall was issued after Subaru found a weakness in the drive chain on some cars, which could break and result in a loss of power on impacted cars. Cause of the issue was programming error in the transmission control unit, the TCU, of course, to allow the clutch to engage before the drivetrain was completely engaged. So obviously a snap and away it goes. So lots of problems there. Nissan Frontier, Titan, and Z cars. Here we are. They're saying 2020 and to 2023, there's 203,223 units that were recalled from the Frontier, the Titan, and the Z's. Transmission correlated with the parking pawl. So if you ever put your car in gear and you feel it kind of like stops, there's a parking pawl. It kind of locks into place, and that prevents the vehicle from moving around. It actually sort of just locks it into place. It's not part of the regular gear system, but it just locks it up. Well, there's been a lot of issues with some of these vehicles just rolling away. It got so bad, in fact, 22 Nissan Z cars were stopped production because they had to sort that issue out, and some of these vehicles were inadvertently rolling away. But we have another one here, Nissan Altima. So they're saying the CVT between 2002 and 2017 on all suffered CVT transmissions, continuously variable transmissions. It's basically pulleys, shivs, belts, that as you accelerate it pulls up, tightens, and it engages, and it's just a mess. I mean, I truly believe CVTs should be relegated literally only to ATV, all-terrain vehicles, little quads and units like that. They had to put these in here claiming that they're better fuel economy, they're more efficient, and there might be some truth to that because they're always in the RPM band where they need to be for maximum performance. So there's probably a little bit of fuel savings, but that's all blown out of the window when you're spending $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 on a new transmission. That generation of the Altima had some of the worst. They were absolute trash bag on wheels, if you ask me. And a lot of them, they say they typically gave up the ghost around 80 to 100,000 miles. So you wouldn't know right away. They would just gradually get worse and worse and worse. You'd sometimes smell smoke. Sometimes you get an inherent delay. Sometimes you get that fault or that code. Sometimes you just have burning smell. And ultimately, it usually resulted in a catastrophic failure. Another one we have is the CVTs in the Nissan Rogues from 2012 to 2018. Very much like we've seen already with some of their other Nissans already described. Known for falling out of gear, delivering poor performance, hesitation, accelerating, smoke, noise. Early failure, of course, usually results in, as much as $8,000 repair bills or even more. Programming issues related to that, fluid changes are supremely important. If you own one of these vehicles, then you'll appreciate that you have to change the fluid if you can on any of these CVTs. That's the only way to even buy yourself a little bit of time. It's not going to fix the problem. It's only going to buy you some time. But changing fluid regularly on your CVTs, specifically Nissan and some of the Jatcos, is absolutely imperative and critical, because if you don't, you're going to have a major, major problem on your hands and more repair bills. Here we have, it says 24 Tacoma. Highlander says that my XSE's transmission died at 40K. Toyota Tacoma transmission problems. TSB over 24 Tacomas. We've heard a lot of Tacomas. They're 8-speed automatic transmission in their new vehicles. And in this case, they're saying the Toyota Tundra, Sequoia, and Lexus LX600 between 2022 and 2024. There's about 280,663 units that are impacted by this unexpected vehicle movement. Sounds very similar to the other one. The issue could occur when certain Toyota vehicles, of course the Sequoia Tundra and Lexus LX600, were in neutral without the brakes applied. The issue impacted more than 283,000 or 280,000 vehicles across 3 models, but thankfully Toyota had a pretty simple fix, a software update for that. But again, here we talk about more software updates. Dealers began rolling out the software patch to impacted models in early 24. So if you happen to be one of those owners of that Toyota with those issues, certainly you want to get on that wagon. What do we have? The 2017 to 2022 Ford F-250 to F-350s. There's about 247,000 of these units and change. Big trucks, big recalls, and big problems. Of course, big expense if you happen to own one of these vehicles outside of warranty and it happens to fail. But there's a recall to cover you there for that. And what they're saying is, we're fitted with the gas engines and aluminum drive shafts. According to the NHTSA, the risk of underbody heat and noise insulators could loosen over time and come in contact with aluminum drive shafts. So yeah, the insulation drops down on a drive shaft. The drive shaft twists it all up, tears everything apart underneath there, which could damage drive shaft and lead to sudden loss in power. Ford, found on road dead. Here we have a Ford Escape, C-Max, Fusion, Transit, Connect, and Edge. We're all of a part of a major recall from vehicles listed between 2013 and 2019. Oh wow, this is a big one. Almost 3 million vehicles impacted. Now that's a long run, of course, a lot of vehicles affected there. They're saying the issue called on owners to take their vehicles to dealership where the shift bushings were replaced and a protective cap was installed to prevent wear and tear. This was the biggest in a long string of recalls to hit Ford, which struggled with quality issues for years. In 2024, automaker finally pledged to clean up its act. after it was hit with a $165 million fine. It's handling in recalls in America. So what they're saying is their response, not ideal. And so NHTSA hit Ford with a major fine. And we know the CEO, of course, Farley, has already commented that that's eating their lunch, and it still continues to eat their lunch, both in terms of fines, but as well as recalls, as well as warranty claims. This is a big issue for Ford. This doesn't seem to be going away, because we even heard a recent one here as well with transmission locking up, and the four wheels, same thing. There's a pinout. I think it was on a 2014 model year, where some of those trucks, they get known just to lock up because a pinout would corrode and it would cause the transmission to act weird. And I mean, this is a Ford issue through and through. Between 2012 and 2016, equipped with the automatic DCT, that's their dual clutch transmission, are notorious for their quality. A dry clutch system, we know it's called the power shift. Dipped in a hydraulic fluid like its competitors, were not their approach. They wanted to go with a dry system, and that was one of their problems. It overheated, it got too hot, and just burned out very quickly, resulting in owners reporting numerous problems like shuddering when accelerating, harsh shifting, falling out of gears, issues when accelerating, juddering, lurching. I know a lot of people who drive these vehicles, and none of them have said, yeah, my transmission works flawlessly. These weren't just found in the Focus. Fiesta as well, I believe, had some of these as well. They say they knew about the problems and released more than 20 internal technical bulletins with this this transmission regarding this DCT. It's a dry DCT, and this DCT gives all other DCTs a bad name because this was one of the worst. Ford even issued recalls and was eventually forced to pay $30 million in lawsuit settlements to correct some of this, or at least to compensate would-be owners of some of these junk transmissions that cost a lot of people, money, time out of their day-to-day business, just try to take their car into the shop or get it towed, and compensation. And it was just a mess. It was just a bad setup. We've got Ford Mustang, and they're saying the MT82 6-speed manual. Now, normally I'm a big advocate for manual gearboxes, and I generally am. I mean, they're a simpler gearbox. The worst thing, you abuse a clutch, you put in a clutch, it's a couple grand. But usually manual gearboxes are very robust, ultimately very reliable, and don't cost a lot of money in the long run. But the problem is with this particular unit, between 2011 and 2020 model year Mustangs that come either with the the EcoBoost, the Turbo 4, the V6, or the V8s, all came equipped with that. Used aluminum casting and internal bell housing, were apparently not up to standards. They weren't robust. They weren't solid. They tend to hold up okay against the EcoBoost, and not bad with the V6s. But when you mated them up with the 8-speed, there was the additional torque, and it would tend to rip these transmissions apart. And so that was a weak manual gearbox. I believe there was also some issues with those transmissions, more specifically in leaking fluid. I think was part of the issue, if I'm not mistaken. Clutch master cylinder would break, could leak fluid and down onto the hot exhaust. So there was also a risk of fire with some of those Ford Mustangs, and some of those, like I said, I love the Mustangs, and I certainly love manual gearboxes, but I don't love failures, and I don't like unpredictable reliability challenges. So what about the next one? Here's one. Now, fortunately for people buying BMWs today, a lot of their modern BMWs are equipped with the ZF 8-speed auto, and that's a pretty robust transmission. It's fun to drive. It predicts your driving behavior. It's very quick. It shifts wonderfully. It's a Jekyll and Hyde, so depending on the way you've tuned it, it's wonderful. But it's also pretty reliable. So the ZF 8-speed auto that you're finding in most of their cars now, their 3 Series, 4, 5, 6 Series, and beyond, are pretty reliable. So they're solid. But the one that I'm talking about is one of the worst for reliability, E60 M5 issues. I made a video on this many moons ago, and you might want to see that. I can actually link that at the end of the video here. Outside of this weird transmission, it is one of the best, most aggressive cars, and you won't find another car like this again with the big screaming V10. But it has what they call the SMG, sequential manual gearbox, and a problem performance even when properly working. It shudders and judders at low speeds. Now, that's not a failure mode in itself. That's just a behavior of the transmission. A lot of people hate it, but anybody who drove early Gallardos, early F1 gearboxes in Ferraris will all notice the same thing. You got a feather getting it in because it's a little juddery. That's not a failure. That's just a bad transmission from a drivability standpoint. But what I always did was I always dialed up the fast speed settings, and it usually sorted that out, and it shifted faster in between. So it was a much better gearbox to run. It did have issues. It liked to eat clutches. It doesn't like a lot of hard launches or would burn clutches out. They're saying higher mileage versions had broken synchronizers because, again, hard shifting, wham, bam, bam, especially if you're putting in the more aggressive shift speeds, it tends to be harder on synchros, low hydraulic pressures, leaks, overheating. And the problem with them is they're very, very expensive to fix. It's BMW, it's old technology. So it's not a daily driver as such. Some people try to drive them daily, but they quickly find out how expensive it is to maintain these vehicles. Some of the worst transmissions, some of the worst engines. There seems to be some common denominators here, folks. Anyway, as always, be sure to check out that video, my BMW E60 M5, the 5 things you need to know about it. And as well, you're definitely going to want to check out that video if you want to hear some of the latest and greatest. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you all real soon. Bye-bye.